the best practices focusing on political parties and for election management bodies. So for political parties, we had three best practice suggestions. The first was to have a deliberate policy within the political party to adopt quota for women was identified, and example was taken from South Africa from the ANC party. The second best practice was having a strong woman political wing, which was identified as very critical because if the wing is strong enough, it is easier to mobilize itself, and also even other women are in power. The third best practice for political parties were having a separate women political party caucus, especially that works cross-party lines is critical, especially where there is lack of representation at political party leadership positions, so that women members of political parties could synergize their voice and present their concerns. So this was for political parties. And for election management bodies, the first best practice suggested was providing for quotas. Example was given from Somalia. There was a 30% quota, which is taught as a best practice, and also to have legislative tools enacting laws to entrench gender quotas, but also to have a specific gender mainstreaming guidelines. This was identified as one of the best practices with example from Kenya. Another suggestion for MPs was to adopt the proportional representation or electoral system. Another suggestion, this was a suggestion from South Africa, of course, and also having the zebra option was as a recognized best practice to ensure inclusivity. So this was for the best practices, and we of course identified lots of challenges. I'll mention few. One of the most significant challenges identified was lack of political will, and where there is no lack of political will, despite the fact that there are enabling legislations, then there is lack of enforcement. Lack of gender policy was identified. Lack of gender equality technical experts among election management bodies were identified. Also having a weak civil society organization, including a shrinking space for civil societies, was identified as a challenge. And from the side of women, lack of confidence, lack of financial support, and lack of having role models were identified. And the issue of technology was also discussed, because when women do not have the capacity to use information technology, that's a huge challenge because they miss a lot of information and they get disconnected, especially from the women's movement that could provide them support. So this is in short my presentation. Anybody from our group can add their voice if I missed anything. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Purity, please don't mute me again. It's delaying this, please. Thank you so much. I got muted again and I can't speak. Okay, thank you so much, Group 2. That was great, Desset. Thank you very much. We'll just move, because of time, we'll move on to Group 3, which was giving space and visibility to women with disabilities in decision making. May we have the rapporteur for this group, Group 3?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm Acen. I was the rapporteur for Group 3. Unfortunately, our moderator wasn't there during the group discussion, and a number of us had to put our issues and recommendations on the chat box. But it was fortunate that we had to link this morning and she gave me her input. So allow me to present what we discussed yesterday. We had 3 questions, and our focus was on inclusion of women with disabilities. The first question is, how can governance processes be improved to leave no one behind, especially people with disabilities, in legal policy and norm change? We had 5 things that we identified, and one was to ensure inclusion of PWDs in the legal and policy frameworks that is aligned with UNCRPD. We took the example of Uganda and Kenya, where the PWD Act was enacted in 2006 and 2007 respectively. But of course, the Act was enacted before the CRPD was brought in place. So government had to sit down and start realigning the law on persons with disabilities with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. 2, we had issues, we had another point that we need to address structural, attitudinal, and systematic barriers and discrimination against women and girls with disabilities in public and private spheres. The 3rd one was legal awareness to improve attitudes, behaviors, and perceptions of the society to support women and girls with disabilities in decision-making. Policy on inclusion and representation on decision-making bodies. We agreed that government and other stakeholders need to develop a policy that provides for inclusion and representation of persons with disabilities in all decision-making bodies and other institutions. For example, in Uganda, we have a number of commissions and bodies at national level, Equal Opportunity Commission, Land Commission, and so forth. So we said that it is important that representation on all those bodies, because those are decision-making bodies that influence certain developments and programs in their sectors. So we said there should be a policy on that so that people with disabilities are included in all decision-making bodies, both at national and local level. And then the last one is on appointment of disability inclusion advisors. We realized that a number of disability issues miss out in many programs, policies, sector documents, legal framework because of lack of people or technical people to support the program or to support people to include issues of disability. So we said that appointment of disability inclusion advisors in all sectors, ministries and departments is very, very critical. So under that, we came with 5 points and that's it. The second question was, what are the current existing challenges for women with disabilities to get into decision-making positions? Not necessarily elective office. We had a number of them. Negative perceptions and attitudes of the society that discriminate women with disabilities affect their full and effective participation in decision-making. The second one was violence of all forms against women and girls with disabilities, which predominantly affect their participation, affect their esteem, affect their capacity to participate in everything. Low self-esteem and limited capacity among women with disabilities. We realize that a number of women with disabilities still have low self-esteem because of compounding factors of discrimination and other issues around the society, the family, and the community where they live. So this affects their participation. The other one is lack of access to information and services targeting the general population. We realize that a number of persons with disabilities, taking, for example, people with hearing impairment, may not have access to information regarding certain things. For example, during this COVID, in Uganda here, one of the deaf persons was killed by the security personnel because he was taken not to be preserving the soap for COVID prevention, and yet he did not know what was happening. So we realized that lack of access to information and services targeting general population affect the participation of persons with disabilities. The other one was low level of education among PWDs, especially women, that limit their representations. A number of PWD representatives have had positions, for example, in elective position. They have been there for decades. Why? Because many persons with disabilities are not educated, and yet certain positions require a certain level of education. So you find that there's low level of education among PWDs. The other one is intersecting discrimination based on gender and disability, which are structural and systematic in nature. We said that women with disabilities experience discrimination of two forms, one having disability and the other one being a woman. So there is that discrimination which is intersecting, and it's both structural and systematic, and this is always left out in both policy, legal framework, and also programs. The other one was limited knowledge of the community, duty bearers, and stakeholders on the needs, capacity, and rights of women with disabilities that increase invisibility in all programs. We realized that a number of people.
Julia, are you going to wrap up now?
Hello?
Can you wrap up in a minute?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. Yeah, that was the second last. And the other one was invisibility of women with disabilities in women's rights agenda, as well as weak disability movement. And I quoted Forgotten Sisters. The third question was on the top 3 recommendations for addressing the gaps in the progress and to whom. We only had 3 general, and one was provide quotas for PWDs in decision-making bodies at all levels. The second one was address structural, attitudinal, and systematic barriers and discriminations against women and girls with disabilities in policies, programs, and practices. The last one was ensure disability is cross-cutting in all development aspects, as well as developing comprehensive programs that builds the capacity of women with disabilities, that empowers them to participate in social and economic spheres. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Group 3. Thank you very much, Julia. Very impressive ideas we've put through, just like the other groups. So we'll move now on to Group 4. Group 4 was looking at the unique role and impact of young people in decision-making in Africa. Who was the rapporteur for that group? That was my group, by the way.
Good afternoon. My name is Annah Macharia. I work as a program associate, UN Women, Peace and Security. In Group 4, we had 3 questions to answer. And the first one was, what are the 3 key things that young people bring into governance and decision making? And we say that a lot of young people are tech savvy, and they will bring in new technology in electoral process management, especially through mobile telephone and other related platforms. They are also innovative and daring to demand that nothing suits them without their inclusion in the decision-making process. And they can demand increased responsiveness and accountability. The second question was, how can their skills be better harnessed? And we had 4 points. The first one was that consistency in building networks among the youth at all levels for effective knowledge sharing and good practices. Strengthening thematic youth caucuses to enhance their role in the governance. Youth mentorship, such as linking youth young university leaders with senior political bigwigs so that they can be mentored in the process, as well as embrace intergenerational linkages and decision-making mechanisms. Our last point of discussion was on how can young people be supported to exercise and to develop their leadership potentials, and by whom. So we say that it would be good to link the political youth wings with the generation youth population, with the general youth population, and having youth service desk in the government departments to inform government decision-making processes as the second. And then to also map out gaps that hinder young people's participation in political spheres and working to fill those gaps. Youth wings should be innovatively and creatively empowered to understand the role of youth leagues and to stay devoid of negative political influence. Young leaders need to get to the center of the decision-making power by putting down mechanisms that if such decision-making center do not comply, then there should be consequences.
Thank you, Clara. I wanted to check if Christine is within us because she was ready to present. But if she's not there, then I can just run through the group presentation. This is McKenna.
Okay. Go ahead, McKenna. Thank you very much.
Okay. The first question that was asking, what are the key perspectives that professional and rural women bring into politics and decision making? We looked at rural women that they can easily identify the basic needs as a priority from a rural perspective, and therefore bring the priorities of within that how they can develop economically, and therefore make achievements at the rural level. Then issues around infrastructure development, needs and access, because most of the issues across Africa, it's the rural urban, the rural populace, they have their challenges there to do with the infrastructure. Then also rural women who are leaders in African countries, we do recognize that agriculture is the economic backbone, and they will also bring perspective of agricultural development. In addition, also most because of population being in a huge population being rural, the issues around education sector needs and planning, and they can bring around the issues around access to the same. Then the story of their community can provide practical and therefore provide practical solutions to the table. Then issues around traditional, social, and stereotyping concepts will the rural woman has a deeper understanding, and they are the first ones that can be used as transformational channels to be able to make their communities and the larger leadership be more progressive in terms of culture. Then rural women in politics and decision-making positions bring a lot of dynamism, and therefore boost the society view in terms of how they view women leadership. And then looking at the urban woman who is a leader, is that what they'll bring to politics, as we have discussed, is the issue around contextualizing, analyzing, and being able to engage with the elites at that level. Then it does widen the range of women's representation and contributions in spaces women are underrepresented. And then also the urban women leaders easily understand and easily understand issues of that are of women's global agenda, and therefore those developmental issues can become national agenda issues. And we gave a case example of course, gender equality and empowerment, and the issue around Beijing platform for action. And that's one of the issues that can easily be articulated by the urban leadership. Then the second question was looking at how both groups, their experiences and knowledge can be harnessed. We again looked at differently and then collectively. For the rural women is being able to build and boost their capacities to be able to contribute to the processes better. We felt that they also feel sometimes not so much included, and to allow their full participation. There's a discussion there that needs to be done around capacities on their rights and networking. But we do recognize that the rural women at a better advantage than the urban woman is at a better advantage than the rural woman. Then the rural women experiences, both good and bad, can be used. One can contribute to the issues for discussion, and can bring the gender agenda on the table using their own experiences. But we did recognize that some of those bad experiences, they more or less need to be modeled through the counseling to be able to tell this story and influence decisions and advocacy in the way that is can best then help in advocacy. Then for the urban woman is in terms of raising awareness and enlightening others on women's rights and the importance to rally behind those rights and laws. Then the urban woman is better placed as a leader to use media to influence and increase women's participation in politics and decision making. Then collectively, we did recognize that if inclusive methodologies are used to collect and document these experiences of both urban and rural, then, and this is done within spaces that we feel safe, this information then, when in fact can be used in the, or collected through the safe spaces and platforms, through role-playing community centers, these stories then can input into the advocacy agenda. Then the issue of participation, effective participation, we did talk about capacities of women being able to advocate for gender equality much better. And then the research and documentation around women leadership, and within that sharing and exchange of experiences on best practices can promote women leadership. And the last question was on varying challenges. What are the varying challenges they both face in participation and what can be done to address these challenges? There was an issue of the rural women and distance to the capital, and that we only said that if government is encouraged or can reach out to the CSOs because they are very much on the ground, and that can be helped to bring issues also upfront very easily. Then the issue of self-confidence and low self-esteem was a challenge. We didn't get to, I think the discussion ended when this point came up. We didn't get to identify a solution, but that was discussed as a challenge. The common challenges across, and I won't dwell into it so much because they were discussed yesterday, was the issue of financial empowerment, access to information, and you remember the conversation around night meetings and women not being able to get that information with the timeliness that it will require them to action. Then the issue around lobbying and advocacy techniques is a challenge for both groups. Then women, there's an observation that not many young women are joining political parties, meaning in as much as we talk, if they're not joining political parties, they may not be able to influence as much in terms of policy. Then, of course, the issues around culture were raised yesterday. I will not dwell much into that. The multiple roles too. And then we all recognize that this space is male-dominated and unfavorable many times for women leaders. Of course, the solutions proposed around finance is financial support. Much. If time allows.
I think this was five.
On leadership is
I'm sure our may want to.
They don't support each other. Into ways
taken. Agenda, can we move on? I don't see any hand up, so we'll move on to the session 3. Thank you so much, all the presenters. We've actually gained 17 minutes. So thank you very, very much. We really kept to time. You promised me and you're really keeping to time. So the session 3, we'll be looking at social norms change and the role of the women's movement, CSOs and networks in awareness raising on women in political and public life. We also have 1 hour for this session, and we have 2 panelists who will be speaking to the panacea of violence against women in elections. We all know that political violence against women is not accidental, not at all. It is orchestrated, organized, and strategic because women in politics often present a threat to the status quo of political life. So this is a very critical session we'll be looking at. We have 2 speakers. The first one is Honorable Martha Karua, who is an MP in Kenya. I hope our MP is with us. Honorable Martha Karua, are you with us?
Former MP.
Former MP.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. See her. I don't know whether I'm much honorable. Gender equality. Have 5. Thank you very much. Hello.
Targeted by fear instilled of violence. keeps women away from public spaces where they should be pursuing their interests alongside their brothers. And my view is that gender-based violence occurs, especially against women, occurs due to the unequal relations between men and women. And this is a trait of patriarchy, which gives or advances male privilege at the expense of women. Equality, which is SDG goal number 5, is therefore one of the tools for ending gender-based violence against women and girls. What I mean is that advancing equality is one way of tackling this unending issue of gender-based violence, and therefore helping to unleash the full potential of women and girls for the ultimate benefit of society. It has been right that gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. And I'm giving examples there that our Constitution has actually, one of our guiding principles of governance in Article 10 of our Constitution recognizes equality as one of the guiding principles. Article 27 in the Bill of Rights states that every person is equal before the law, has the right to equal protection, equal benefit of the law. Subclause 3 also recognizes that women and men have the right to equal treatment, including the right to equal opportunities in political, economic, cultural, and social spheres. Article 29 provides for the right to freedom and security of the person, which covers the right not to be subjected to any form of violence from public or private sources. Our penal laws echo the Constitution, and therefore our legal framework is actually adequate. And our Constitution does recognize international covenants that are so CEDAW and all the others are part of Kenyan laws by virtue of our Constitution. But this has not translated into the protection against violence for women and girls. There is a great difference between what is in the law and the practice. And I think this is because the way the society treats women generally informs women's treatment in the political space and in decision making. And our political and social culture
Hello, Honorable.
is about Acen, one orange. They also say 40% of men at the same age bracket have been victims of violence. In Kenya, in Kenyan political space, physical assault, sexual and emotional violence are the most common forms of violence experienced by women. No serious attempt, in my view, has been made to deconstruct patriarchy, which is the underpinning of our society, either through sustained awareness campaigns or consistency in enforcement of our laws. The reality is that women still suffer gender-based violence in the political space. And I've already indicated it's either physical or verbal. Stereotyping and negative language reinforce patriarchy on a daily basis. And also some of the examples that are in our school books continue our election however, violence violence incident the county assembly actions any protect women another thing. By these kind of things. So what then should we do? And before I go to what we should do, I want to give my personal story as a person who's been in politics for close to 30 years. When I was running the first time in 1992, which is almost 30 years ago, there was very serious violence. My supporters were attacked. The attack was targeting me, but I was in a different vehicle. And a few people got very serious injuries. The law enforcement agencies were not interested in taking up the matter. Instead, they wanted to arrest my key supporters on trumped-up charges. We had to go to court for protective orders. If you compare almost 3 decades ago and today, you will see that we have not or stating more clear, but it has not in society, in law enforcement that protect women and girls. So what is the problem? We have all the international covenants that we need. We have domesticated this in our laws, yet we are not getting there. And my view is that there has to be a real commitment from the political class to implement our laws and the international covenants that we are a party to. And there has to be a real commitment to dismantle patriarchy. An awareness campaign that targets the entire society, that targets policymakers, that targets parliamentarians, that targets civil society, and putting gender relations as part of the school curricula. I'm glad it was already captured in the presentations that have happened before me. We must move from having laws and policies to real action, and it has to be a concerted, sustained action. Also, political parties. As women, we have to come together, have a unity of purpose to be able to leverage on our clout. If women are speaking in one voice within political parties and in the political space, they will be able to force political parties to tackle issues that concern them. But it looks like when we compartmentalize ourselves to our parties, then the divide and rule works against us. And that's why even in politics, the winnable seats are normally given by the political parties assigned to men, when women could easily win those seats if they're assigned to them. So for me, the cure for gender-based violence is a campaign, a sustained campaign to dismantle patriarchy. And that we can only generate the political will if women and men of goodwill who see the need for gender equality and elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls, if we join together, this is a war we can win. We cannot be waiting to review every couple of years or every decade to find that we are not really moving. I think that's all I would like to state. I believe my time is up.
Thank you very much, Honorable Martha. Yes, you've kept to time. I let you speak on because then I was corrected to say you guys have each 10 minutes. So thank you very much. You've raised really critical issues in terms of male privilege and patriarchy. You're so right. You also made reference to SDG 5, which is the docking station for all the SDG goals. Really great. If only the gender-sensitive provisions in our constitutions and different legislations were implemented and enforced, it will go a long way in protecting women against violence. The political parties, you're right, sometimes they don't respect the code of conduct. It is like they're tolerating violence. So we should be looking at all of these issues. The police, you talked about the police. I think what we really need is a non-partisan police force. Once the police is in line with the ruling government, they will turn a blind eye, especially if the man or the woman is from an opposition party. So you're right, the media, the police, and the women's movement have all played a critical role. Thank you so much once again, Honorable Annah Macharia, for raising those critical elements, critical points to help us forge forward. I will now call on to our brother to make his presentation. Mr. Paul Kuria, over to you. You have 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Clara and Abu. And I'll just be emphasizing and perhaps filling the gaps from what Honorable Annah Macharia, my senior, has just presented. And allow me to just switch off my video and just go straight to the voice so that I can save part of my bandwidth. And okay. Please, thank you so much. I think it's good to appreciate that the expansion of democratic space that has been spurred in African continent through the constitutional reviews, what we may call the constitutional revivals, has in the last decade, 2 decades or so, led to hotly contested and competitive elections. And we have seen the last 2 decades, women and minority groups in Africa gaining much more opportunities to exercise their political rights. Unfortunately, the same opportunities have been taken away where they're not able to exercise or enjoy their civil rights. We know that elections are the main processes through which formal political power is established and the voting rights are realized. As a rule of thumb, we know very well that when you improve political empowerment for women through many processes, including electoral processes, this corresponds to increased participation of women in labor, in governance, and general well-being of girls and women. And despite these realities, you understand, you find that many political regimes have devoted violence against women in elections as a single most effective tool and weapon to deter women and girls, and by extension, other minority communities from realizing their political rights. So on the other hand, we know very well that violence against women in elections in itself is a threat to the integrity of the electoral process and to the quality of democracy. So it's, as Mother Karua says, it's a violation of political and human rights. And in Kenya, in particular, it's a criminal offense. So it is a collective responsibility of everyone here to ensure that, one, we design interventions and programs that support women to safely participate in elections and in the political processes. Two, we ensure that women, we support electoral processes and events that are very peaceful, fair, and safe for all. And we ensure that women and girls participate in elections on equal measures as men and boys. And lastly, we ensure that women and the girls, or youth for that matter, young women, enjoy civil rights. But then what is the magnitude of violence against women in elections in Africa? We know very well that this is completely understated and underestimated, not only in Africa, but across the world. Because violence against women in elections is not only used to intimidate women aspirants and candidate voters, or even incumbents, women political holders at the moment, but it's a means to send very strong messages that women do not deserve to participate in elections, which really is quite unfortunate. And therefore, you find that violence against women in elections varies by form, by types, by motives, and impact, and will affect different categories of women variably, and its intensity and frequency will vary by regions and counties. I think it's also important to appreciate that we don't have comparative data across countries, and they are not known, to the best of my knowledge, of international agreed indicators and data collection methods to measure incidence and prevalence of violence against women. This means that everything we are talking about in here is active estimates and testimonials that are coming from women politicians, for example, Honorable Mother Kuria, to define interventions that are designed to reduce and eradicate violence against women in elections. But I don't think we have an agreed definition of what constitutes women against violence against women in elections, because it's sometimes so normalized, sometimes it's completely indirect and concealed. In some contexts, you'll find in some communities it is justified as a necessary price to pay just because you are in politics, which is completely unfortunate. So it is important to understand both direct and indirect forms of violence against women in elections. Now, it is a fact that women tend to be attacked simultaneously by their colleagues, by the members of their party, the citizens and public servants, whenever they are vying for any position, electoral position. And we have seen that this has been extended not only to those who are aspirants and candidates, but also the voters, the female journalists, and election managers. It's a new phenomenon that is coming in, that election managers, particularly women election managers, political professionals, security agencies, the women human rights defenders, as Mother Kuria has already given an example, an activist, the women judges in courts, all these tend to be targeted and being exposed to the risk of violence. But then Mother has already spoken about the drivers and the causes of violence against women. But I want to re-emphasize here that it ranges from very structural factors to harmful forms and stereotypes, lack of political goodwill, lack of protective legislative framework or weak legal and policy framework, cultural factors such as patriarchy, and the Mother has alluded to this. But most interestingly, it is unrealistic expectations of the electorate, the constituents, the spouses themselves, the political parties, the fellow women, candidates and aspirants, just to mention a few, that the bar is set too high for the women who are vying for the positions during the electoral process. Now, lack of adequate election processes, including infrastructure, is a key driver for violence against women in elections. When we have delayed commencements of elections, do we ever start elections on time in Africa? I'm not quite sure. Lack of lighting and poor management of the election logistics often causes uncertainty and fuel violence. Of course, the new thinking in the gender agenda equation is that we need to put men at the center. And therefore, it's my view that we need to understand the perpetrators, and majority of whom of violence against women in elections are men. We need to understand what motivates them, what drives them, and the majority of them are going to be in the political parties. They are going to be the citizens. They are going to be serving security agencies. We also have online independent attackers and hackers, who are strangers. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to prosecute such online harassments, because sometimes the perpetrators are living in a different country from where the survivor is. Now, also citizens, studies have shown that citizens constitute a major driver of violence. And in some countries, they are responsible for more than 80% of the violence that is faced by women during elections. Now, in my view, therefore, it is important that women aspirants, candidates, the voters, the election observers, so to speak, the women movement, security agencies, political parties may require lots of training just to identify triggers for such violence. Now, in private spaces, unfortunately, some violence is perpetuated by intimate partners, close relatives and children, and your own staff out of their own volition, or sometimes upon instigations by the perpetrators. Now, I want to highlight a few, if you allow, Clara, some of the emerging issues. And one is that we see a lot of, in Africa in the last couple of years, we see and witness a lot of violence that is targeting women in election management bodies as professionals. And unfortunately, our election laws do not protect such because they may not be, they're not candidates or aspirants. Two, the female journalists who tend to cover violence directed to women and profile women candidates, or they write and cover stories about women politicians. Amara will tell you, these are targeted for harm and with various forms of violence. We have seen the human rights defenders, the civil activists and head of women movement organizations that are supporting the women cause in elections also suffer violence directed to them based on their political stance. Just that. The women office holders, the incumbents, if we know you're an incumbent, you're at higher risk, you're more vulnerable because you're highly visible and you're an open symbol of social change. Now, there's a new type of violence that is coming through semiotic language. We use called semiotic violence, where we use against women candidates, which is gaining currency, where perpetrators use code languages. And it's very difficult to design this into an offense. Very, very, very complicated, particularly when we use our local dialects. The continuum of violence. We need to ask ourselves, when and how does the violence during elections begin? Sometimes they begin way before elections and way after, continues to way after the electoral period. And then we would say, oh, we have already closed the election period, so we are not going to prosecute such matters. It's good to look at it's not only good, but it's critical to look into the continuum and capture the violence that is experienced by both women candidates and women aspirants in different times of the election cycle. Now, lastly, or maybe not lastly, but other reporting of by the women candidates and aspirants on violence that they suffer. This is because, as Martha said, they don't report because violence is associated with stigma. It's a GBV. It's fear of political and personal retaliation. Lack of trust with the judicial system. The political systems themselves and institutions, such as our own political parties and parliament, often discourage women, from formally reporting violence. Women also fear their safety and identity, and they're intimidated by the infrastructure. I want to tell you, Clara, that majority of our election management bodies do not have instruments, checklists, and spaces where women, or where they can even record incidences and occurrences of violence against women. And therefore, you won't even find it in what we call administrative data or records. Now, I also want to move to the election observers, whether local or international. They lack necessary tools and checklists to monitor violence against women. Of course, in some observers and international guidelines, you'll find that violence against women is not an integral component of assessing the quality of elections. I hope that the Declaration of Principles of International Election Observers and its guidelines that were adopted in 2018 will give us an entry point to this. But we also lack gender experts among the election experts and election observers, to advance the value for monitoring violence against violence as a key component of the electoral process. Now, if you ask me what are the opportunities, therefore, that we are left with, there are many. And I like this lady, Rosina D. Meko, who has prepared a paper known as titled Women's Political Networks, Defining Leadership, Breaking Barriers, and Fostering Change. Now, this is what she says, because she truly believes in women political networks as great incubators and effective spaces for mentoring, coaching women to overcome both the universal cultural and structural barriers that they face during the political career. These are the opportunities. One is that the women movement CSOs can support reliable data collection and emerging drivers of violence against women in elections. This may require very innovative techniques that we may not have thought about in the past. One is big intelligence data, the vortex, the data that is available on Twitter, the Facebook, and all those kind of things. We should look at the data on intimate partner. Why would my spouse, why would I turn around my spouse who is vying for a position? I've seen this in Kenya, for instance. Setting up, another opportunity is to look at, collect data from testimonies. Martha has already given us her own testimonies. And most importantly, for those who have been elected and those who withdrew, women do not lose elections. They just withdrew because they are forced to do so. Now, women movements should also advocate for inclusion of violence against women in elections, data collection modules in the national statistical systems and frameworks. It is never covered in our DHSs. It's never covered in any of the surveys across Africa. Perhaps violence against women in elections is perceived not to ever happen in Africa. Now, work with the political parties to increase the trust in their institutional response to violence against women. For example, setting up internal processes, as you have correctly put it and summarized, mechanisms to address violence against women when it's reported. We should encourage the political parties' disciplinary mechanisms. We strengthen them. So, and we adhere to the code of conduct, electoral code of conduct, the party code of conduct, etc. Women also create safe spaces that encourage women in elections, opportunities to hold open discussions. This is one of those spaces that you have given us. They are going to talk about it and how it happened. Now, this is very important. In Kenya, we have what is called the Kenya Women Candidates Association, which is such an example. As we speak today, in Kenya, the women parliamentarians are meeting in Serena, discussing spaces and safe spaces for women. I would imagine that elections will be one of them. Now, you can also, as women movements, work very closely with election experts and put in measures to deter violence against women. We can also work and also put in tools and instruments to monitor levels and trends of violence during elections and formulate together necessary tools and checklists. Now, citizens are great agents of, and they're very good in observation of elections, but they need significant training to support the monitoring of violence against women in elections. I'm aware that NDI and Keta, the Keta Center has made significant efforts towards this. Now, lack of proper elections preparedness is really a driver for violence against women in elections. So the women movement can work with the electoral bodies to ensure that we put such a strong system. We provide necessary and basic infrastructure, such as basic lighting. When election, when the polling is happening late at night, management of logistics and key measures to deterring uncertainties that really build tensions and occurrence of violence. Women movements can also advocate for the strengthening of the witness protection agencies. We also have the victim protection bodies and programs for women in elections who may need these services. And I work for the National Gender and Equality Commission, and therefore we need to strengthen the gender oversight machineries and bodies, the human rights bodies that exist in all our countries, so that they can monitor and they can report and talk about these cases, particularly during the international reporting on or in the community of practices. We also need to strengthen financial and psychosocial support systems for women who suffer great losses during elections, mainly due to violence, so that they can rebound back with dignity. Mother Karua, I've never run for any political position, but Mother Karua tells me that elections is very expensive. Campaigns are very expensive, and sometimes women lose all their property. Who cares about that? Who cares about them and bring them and support them to rebound back to dignity? I think it is the role of the women movement bodies or movement agencies. Women movement can also support the strengthening of political dispute resolution mechanisms. I believe and truly believe in the power of the political parties in trying to ensure that they set in mechanisms, they set dispute tribunals. And for independent candidates, I also know that they have their own caucuses. I think we need to strengthen this because it's not always, political parties are not only the vehicles that will take you to the elections. Now, I only have 3 more points, Clara, to go through. I can see you looking at me. But looking at everyone else, it's worked very closely.
Thank you.
I'm wrapping. It's working closely with other actors to advocate for the enforcement of the existing laws. And where necessary, we can support the legislative arm so that they can undertake electoral legal reforms to ensure adherence to electoral code of conduct, adherence to campaign financing. The money is used a lot when you want to push violence against women during elections. Women themselves will never use such resources for that. But and then also enforcement of the code of conduct, the code of elections, etc. Now, the women movement to advocate for the security systems to hasten the collection of evidence and investigation of cases of violence against women, and deter them being used as tools and instruments for perpetuating violence. And women movements can advocate for expedited access to justice for the survivors of violence against women in elections. I mean, we just take too long to adjudicate and make and issue judgments on matters related to gender-based violence and violence during the elections. Now, the women networks can be advocates of women rights defenders, including promoting the rights and safety of the female journalists. Of course, we do not have solutions to everything, but I think Africa needs to work together, especially those that really perpetuate violence through online, or internet, which is a new incentive, I would say, in Africa as we embrace digital and ICT space. We seem also to be using that to really perpetuate online violence. Thanks so much, Clara. That's all I have for now. Unfortunately, I'm not likely to participate in these group sessions, but I'm happy to meet with a group online anytime that they are available. Asanteni sana, that's what we say in Kenya.
Asante sana, Mr. Paul Kuria. It's just wonderful to see how your two presentations, that of Honorable Martha Karua and yourself, how the blend. Thank you so much again to both of you. Thank you, Mr. Paul Kuria. You've really raised some issues regarding the expansion of the democratic space. But I really liked you because what you said about data. Yes, mapping and collecting data about violence against women in election is the critical first step in mitigating and preventing violence against women in elections, because it enables the problem to be identified and measured, its pattern and associations to be understood, and the relevant responses to be taken. So the issue you raised on data is really very important and critical. Also, electoral reforms. It's sad to know that some violence, most of the time it goes unreported because of safety-related issues, but it's really sad. And we know that justice delayed is really justice denied. Yes, political parties have a role to play, including the women's movement. So as we're looking at the recommendations, we really look at what the political parties, the women's movement, and gender missionaries can play, including security. Very, very important. Yes, campaigns are very expensive. So financial support to women will look into that one. So thank you very much. Again, we've done really good, excellent with time. I will open it now to the floor for questions and contributions. I want my colleagues to help me looking at the hands. I am trying to look at the chat box and to listen to the contributions. So I'm not able to see the hands. So Jebe or Jawad, if you see any hand that is raised, please just let me know. Thank you very much.
There are questions. There are questions in the chat room, actually, from Jonathan, like 2 questions he would like to ask.
Let me go there now. Let me go. Question from who?
From Jonathan, which of the existing electoral models can help to reduce political and election violence against women? Okay. That's the question number 1.
I've seen that one, yes, from Jonathan Sandy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Question number 2, the role of electoral courts, what penalties or measures for perpetrators?
Okay. Thank you very much, Jawad, for helping me with those. Can we have like 3 and then our panelists will respond? Do we have any other questions, Jawad, on the chat box?
Oh, not yet. All of these 2.
So let's respond to those 2. The other ones are comments, which I will read through later. Okay, over to you, our panelists. You can just jump in, either Paul Kuria or our MP.
I'm letting Honorable Mother go first, please.
Yes, okay, Honorable. Thank you, Honorable.
Thank you, Paul. The first question was, which political system? I think it's not a question from where I see it of which political system. It's a question of why are we failing to enforce the laws and the policies. Because I already explained that in Kenya, the law is okay. With the international instruments, yet violence societal norms and attitudes which normalize violence against women, where even when a spouse and really cause grievous harm, or when the attitude will go something
Well, I think we're having some issues with Honorable. I think the internet is not that strong where she is. I think we lost her.
That this being
Honorable, we can't hear you. Honorable Martha. Mr. Paul, if you want to come in, I think we lost Honorable. If you want to provide some answers to the questions.
Very well, Clara. And very well, Clara, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Very well, very well. I'm sure she'll fill in the gaps that we'll be able to get her soon. Now, the question on the electoral models that, and I'm trying to get to the question. Which of the existing electoral models can help reduce political and election violence against women? I do not know of any specific electoral model that would deter violence against women. I think I want to join Martha. It's about, compliance. It's about enforcement of the law, compliance with the electoral courts, compliance with all the systems and processes that have been put, and ensuring that elections are free and fair and attractive to everyone. It cannot be that elections are only attractive to men. So I think all forms of electoral models have the capability and potential of fueling violence against women during elections. So it's a way we manage that in our own respective countries. Now, as far as the court is concerned, I think there's a question that was the next question that Abu read. I'm trying to get a question so that I don't, the role of the electoral courts, what penalties or measures for the perpetrators. I am sure in every country, there are very stiff penalties. And this has been described as offenses. The violence against women during elections is an offense, that attracts a lot of huge penalties, whether it is in cash form or whether it's, when you're convicted, you have a jail term that, or you are expelled by the political parties and all those kind of things. But still we see majority of men still taking opportunities for this. They're able to get away with it. They're able to pay those penalties. They're able to avoid the jail term and ask for the leniency. And they go back to the political parties. Remember, majority of them are the owners of the same political party. So how do you expect to expel your own leader, or the head of the political party, or the secretary general, those kind of things? So the governance structure of our political parties must ensure they comply and include women in the very significant positions, because if they are not on the decision table, then remember, when you go to the dispute resolution mechanisms, it's the same men who are going to pass the judgments and men will be let go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Honorable Martha, as well. We lost you at some point in time, but we got the first part of your presentation in terms of responding to the questions. I just want to quickly go through the chat really quickly. Contributions from the chat. Spacious says there's need to dismantle patriarchy. That's true. And also to build the capacities of women candidates. That also helps a lot. Thank you, Honorable Martha and Mr. Paul Kuria. This has been a very enlightening presentation. I hope we will be availed of the papers. It's been quite insightful. This was from Yemi Falayajo. Yeah, and then let's see the last one so that we close this session. Also from Spacious, elections observation tools are not, for most of the times, analyzes the issues facing women. They are limited to observable facts on the presence of women as candidates or elections officers. Yes, that's true. Well done, Paul. Well done, Honorable, for the great presentation. I'm just taking them from the chat. I think, did we respond to this already? Election security administration and management. How can we make the security sector institutions accountable for political and elections related violence against women? Did we already respond to this? We can just, if not, we can give the last 2 minutes to our panelists to respond in terms of holding security agents to account. What can be done? That's a big problem when it comes to violence against women and girls. Any thoughts to our two presenters here?
I think it all goes down to political will, because if the leadership, the top leadership of the country wants violence against women eradicated, then there's going to be pressure on the law enforcement agencies to perform. But if everybody's attitude is that this is okay, or we can tolerate this, there will be no enforcement. I talked of a case which was in the full glare of cameras. Nothing has happened in spite of promises from the highest level. So it all goes down to political will and also to concerted action by women and men of goodwill to bring pressure, because you can generate political will through pressure.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much. I would just, Mr. Paul, I think the Honorable has responded to that really
absolutely
well. Yes, thank you so much, Honorable. And just some contributions from the chat in terms of early warning and early response mechanisms to help enhance data collection. Yes, that is critical. It can happen from Jonathan Sandy. And also from Oliver Kinabo. This is to you, Honorable Martha. You did mention physical, sexual, and psychological violence as common in election, but I would like to draw your attention onto sextortion form of violence, which is now rampant in many countries. Maybe women are still silent on this. We need to break this silence. Okay, note taken, sextortion. That's, I agree. Yes, we hear you, Oliver. And the last one, and up from Kisembo, Agnes, an observation is that generally there are new dynamic violence being embraced currently as a weapon for winning elections in Uganda. We have witnessed it's being used against both men and women to an extent of using physical violence to humiliate those senior political officers that have overstayed in power. It's one cause for women. That's from Uganda. I think I have questions for Honorable Martha. Could we put our questions on the chat box, and then I don't know how we manage this, because we need to close this session now so that we go on to the next presentations. And Barbara says, yes, police brutality is extreme, yet they should be the defenders. Somebody, Seble, I have questions for Honorable Martha. What are the questions? In a few seconds, please. Seble.
Yeah, are you listening?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hearing me? Okay, so yes. I'm really grateful for the insightful presentation by Honorable Martha and Paul. But you know, Martha said in her presentation that we already have sufficient international legal instruments, but it's only a problem of implementing the laws. But you know, as we heard from Paul, there is a major problem with this violence against women in elections that's coming from this online media, you know. So that means the Facebook and other conglomerates are really playing their role towards this perpetuation of the violence. So can we say there is sufficient international legal laws if we are not in a position to let them account for their contribution? This is the first. And the second is, what is the role expected of international observers? You know, for example, there was election observation in Ethiopia, but you know, this gender parity issue has never been an issue to consider the fair and freeness of the election. So please just provide this explanation on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seble. Honorable Karua, could you respond in a few seconds? Just the main ideas you have on this.
I want to agree that we may need maybe even another international covenant on cyberbullying. But in Kenya, we do have a specific law that targets cyberbullying. Implementation may be lacking, but the legal framework is there. As for the observers, I personally think that we cannot load on our lack of effective implementation of laws against violence onto the observers, because the process is longer than the people are there. But yes, the observers should take note, but the real action is with our countries, with ourselves.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kuria. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul Kuria. They have muted everyone, so they can't clap, but you can see me clapping for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Very inspirational. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So could we stretch for just 2 minutes wherever you are? Just stand from your seat and let the blood flow down to your legs. Could we just stand for 2 minutes? Just to get back that energy, please, stand. It's very useful. We've been sitting forever. Could we just stand for 1 minute? And I hope you all know that UN Women is 10 years old. You're aware of that, right? We need to clap for UN Women who are 10 years old. Yay, yay, yay. Thank you so much. We're trying to push forward the gender equality and the women's empowerment agenda. Thank you so much. So I think we can now take our seats. I've taken mine. So our next presenter is Dr. Asha Al-Karib. He is the strategic advisor of the Sudanese Organization for Research and Development. He will be looking at the changing negative social norms on women's political participation in decision-making. Do we have Dr. Asha Al-Karib in the house? Do we have him?
Yes, we have her. Purity, can you unmute Dr. Asha? She's online now.
Okay, very good. We'll have the two presentations together. Dr. Asha will speak for 10 minutes on the negative social norms, changing negative social norms. And then we'll also listen to Ms. Memory Kachambwa. She is the executive if you have 10 minutes, you have promised me that you'll keep to 10 minutes or even less. So can I hand it over now to Dr. Asha regarding the changing negative social norms? Welcome, Dr. Asha. We can see a screen. You may go and unmute Dr. Asha, please, Purity, if she's still unmuted, because we can't hear her.
She's unmuted, actually. Yeah, but there's something wrong going with her side.
Yes, yeah, we can't hear her. Ooh, we can see the screen. Dr. Asha, do you have some problems connecting?
Yes, Dr. Asha might be having problems because.
So maybe, okay, maybe we can go on to memory and then we will bring back Dr. Asha. Or what do we think, Jawad? Jawad?
I think you can go on to the next presenter and then
memory. Yes. Right. Okay. Memory. Miss Memory Kachambwa, who is Executive Director of FemNet, will be speaking to the women's movement as a catalyst for change. Memory, great to see you. Hello.
Nice to see you, Clara, and thank you so much. If I may please ask Jared whether you have my presentation.
I can see Dr. Asha. We still have Dr. Asha's presentation on it.
Yeah, Dr. Asha has just come back and we heard her voice and she wants her presentation back.
Okay, all right. Dr. Asha, sorry about the difficulties you're facing. We can see your presentation. Can you now speak? I don't think so. I don't think so. Memory, you might want to speak now. I think Dr. Asha is still having some difficulties. Memory?
Thank you so much. So maybe if the presentation can come on.
Yes, please. Just
okay, thank you, Purity.
And maybe I can start as Purity puts up the presentation.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about the women's movement as a catalyst for change. And you see on my slide, I've put the Beijing plus 25, knowing that this is the week where we are celebrating the 25th year of the Beijing, but also recognizing that there is something that happened at Beijing which shifted the women's movement, which had a great impact, particularly on women in decision-making. And I will start with a quote from one of my favorite quotes from Winnie Byanyima. And if you may allow me, let me just also remove my video.
No problem, Memory.
Okay, so I'll start with a quote. Next slide, please. A quote from Winnie, and she says, without women's equal access to positions of decision-making power and a clear process to get there, gender equality, global security, and peace will never be realized. And I think this is really, really important, particularly when we talk about the process to get there. Next slide. Next slide.
Yes, it will come. Usually it takes some time to move to the next slide.
All right, no, that's fine. Yeah. All right, that's okay. So I really wanted to just emphasize in a few minutes how the women's movement has supported women in decision-making, why it is critical for the women's movement to work with women in decision-making, and the issue around forging allies, particularly engaging the middle-class women. And I put middle-class women specifically because when you look at the demographic dividend, they actually usually the ones who are not engaged or don't want to have any engagement in issues to do with politics, but yet most of them are also in decision-making. And also engaging men, bridging the generation and the rural divide. I think this has all already been covered. And then I'll also end with just a clarion call, which Honorable Martha, we call her our president, incumbent, but our president one day, what she also mentioned a few weeks ago about her story and how that can really change narratives and the role of the women's movement in already shaping that and already documenting that. Next slide. So just starting globally, if the Global Fund for Women have actually put out research that says that women's movement are the best guarantee of securing and protecting women's rights. They are more powerful than national wealth, progressive political parties, or even the number of women in government. So this is what women's movement have done globally. They've ended civil wars. They've elected female presidents. We know in Ethiopia, we do have a female president. We've had Sirleaf Johnson. We've also had a female president in Malawi on the African continent. In fact, it is the African continent which has had the highest number of female presidents when you compare to other continents. The women's movement have also secured laws protecting millions of women and girls, and they've also won the right to vote. Next slide. So there is that recognition of civil society and the women's movement. And yesterday, Madame Rose Rwabuili, the Director of Gender Monitoring Office in Rwanda, actually gave an example of the instrumental role that the women's movement played in terms of training the women parliamentarians before, during, and even after the elections. And those are just some of the few examples. We've also had examples from the women's movement on how women's rights organizations have made deliberate efforts to work in constituencies which are female-led. By that, ensuring that there is visibility for the women to be re-elected, but also supporting the women and the female parliamentarians, because we know one of the biggest issues that has already been mentioned is the issue around resources and how difficult it is to get resources. We know that why we speak a lot about the Beijing 95, because this was one instrument, and Florence Butegwa mentioned it yesterday, that this is one instrument that really accelerated activism within the women's movement and also within the government. So that's one, that 30% participation was something that was really pushed for by the women's movement. And also, this is something that we have seen over time. Here, where I am right now in Kenya, we have seen the 1/3 gender rule not being implemented. But we've also seen in some countries where they've actually taken it on as a minimum, but also not sustaining it. So maybe in one election it comes, in another election it doesn't come. But we must also commend Rwanda as being the world country with the highest number of women, and this has been consistent through more than 2 terms. So it was just not a fluke, but we have actually a country on the African continent which has had up to 30% in Beijing. So the women's movement has also worked with women in decision making to craft and influence constitutions and also to provide technical support. Next slide. So why is it really critical? I think we are at a time where it's very critical for the women's movement to work together with women in decision making to safeguard the gains that have been made, and also to advance gender equality, and in particularly the feminist agenda. We also have seen the reversals and the clawbacks on provisions that the women's movement has really fought for. And this has also been supported by women in decision making. But without that support and continued support, we see there's that clawback as well. And I think one of the things is also the provision of a safety net. 2 weeks ago, we were meeting with women parliamentarians and women in politics, and they did mention something that UN Women actually did a couple of years ago, where they provided a space for women in politics to just have a safe space to do that self-care, to be able to, you know, share and express some of the experiences that are happening. So that is really, really important for the women's movement, working together with the women in decision making. And also supporting. We know the amount of violence that is on. I think this has already been said in the previous presentation, but we also know that the media also plays a big role, and working with the women's movement, I think that is something that needs to be maintained as well. And also ensuring that the women who are in decision making are also addressing the structural inequalities, and this is very important. And we have seen a lot of disappointment also, where you find sometimes, and understandably so, but also not sometimes you find women in decision making or in parliament or in politics not pushing that agenda. And we understand, because at the end of the day, women are put into positions through the political parties, and there's a political party whipping. But it's only the women who have managed to stand in solidarity together and come up with women's caucuses, and with the women's movement supporting that as well. So I think this is something that needs to be constantly, that connection, so that the women, when they are in positions of decision making, they are constantly addressing the issues that will also, if they are not careful, will take them out of their positions, but also creating a space and setting a norm which is transformative for more women, especially young women, to be in that policies, in politics and decision making as well. So we need each other. We really need each other. Next slide. If you can see on this slide, this was just exactly last year in September, actually on the 15th of September, which is just yesterday, 1 year ago. This is the kind of picture where you find the future of a development bank with only 1, 2, 3, 4 women, and decisions are being made. So this is something that we still need each other. This is why the movement We are far, and we need each other to make sure that this picture is not the same picture that we'll see again exactly next year. Even during this COVID, the African Union chair set up a committee to respond and to raise resources for COVID. And there was only one woman, Dr. Ngozi, and the rest were men. So we still need to fight the system at each and every level.
Memory, will you want to start wrapping up?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So if you can just go through the slides, I was just going to also show how the women's movement has also worked with women in decision making in terms of using the hashtags. And this is from across, from South Africa, from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Sudan. So this is really, really important in terms of working with the women's movement for that catalytic action to happen. But as I finish, one of the things, if you can keep going on to slide 15, I just also wanted to emphasize the issue around feminist leadership, that working with the women's movement is just not only pushing women to be in decision making, but a kind of leadership that is feminist, that looks at issues of power. Next slide, please. That looks at issues of solidarity, that also looks at issues of really tackling the issues around patriarchy as well. And I think, if I may just also dismantle and say, there are dominant power structures, and within the decision making, the political arena. And I think it's important for us to know that they use tactics of misinformation, stereotypes, discrediting, stigmatizing, slandering, all those that question and challenge. And we've read this from the experiences which we have been shared already. And these are the same tactics that are used to defend things like racism, like imperialism, apartheid, slavery. So when we say we are pushing for a feminist and a transformative leadership form, is to say it's important to understand that when most political parties are owned by men, financed by men, and women are just pawns within those political parties. So this is why the women's movement still remains very, very critical. If you may go right to the end, I also just as I end, just to also say, working with male allies. So I think it's also important when you work with male allies to say, when male allies, it's not about them coming into the space, but them also creating space. So for example, if you are a man and you are in a position of power, how do you also leverage and also create space for another woman to come and also tell the other men within the structure? So I think that issue of working with male allies, even though it is important, I think it is the way of working where they should champion the cause for women among men themselves. Not that we need the men in our space, yes we do, but they should be telling the other men how the modus operandi should and how it should be shifted, and not just within the political realm, but also at the family level. And lastly, to say her story must be told. I mean, we must be telling our children about women, female leadership. We must, be telling them about the soldiers of Dahomey, the princesses, Queen Zinga, what Prof. Wangari Maathai said, Winnie Madikizela. So we really have a long way in terms of documenting her story. No one is going to write about the women that we have and the women that we have within the political realm. It's up to us to do that and to support that and to work together with the women's movement and the women in decision making. Asante sana.
Asante sana, Memory. Thank you very much. I don't know whether Dr. Asha is now back. We can try to put up her presentation. Memory, you raised critical points about the women's movement that ended the civil wars. And also, we talked about the Beijing Platform for Action, which accelerated activism on the promotion of women's rights and even helped to set up the gender machinery as we have them now. Yes, feminist leadership, critical, can be a man or a woman. Feminist leadership. Yeah, thank you so much. We're running against time now. Dr. Asha, may we have you now? Thank you so much, Memory Asante Sana. Dr. Asha? Hello, Dr. Asha, over to you. Hello, we can go ahead, please. Oh, go ahead. Okay, Dr. Asha, go ahead. Just go ahead from your own computer.
Slide 3, Joshua.
Yes, yes, you may continue on the changing negative social norms. Yeah. Very well, Doctor. We can hear you. You may go ahead, Doctor. Yes, Dr. Asha. We can hear you. Go ahead. Yes. Hello, we can hear you on Dr. Asha. Yes. Give me water. No.
Was an elite-led, almost like town-based movement, led by the few educated women, mostly teachers, but they were not dare enough to go into to challenge the traditional, the cultural, social norms. like violence against women or child marriage or female genital mutilation or domestic issues. So they focus on the public sphere. They do not go into the private sphere. And they work within the prevailed discourse using the very limited space provided through the advancement of education. And of course, also, as I said, through the independence struggle in the country. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the care for the Sudanese women movement was moving slowly upward. Women education increased. Women went into employment. They gained the right for equal pay. They gained the right for political to be elected, and all that was led by the Sudanese Women Union. And of course, I must say that was something, because at that time in the mid-60s and the early 70s, most of the African countries, the women did not get gain the political rights. And this continued, the care continued to move slowly. And when I say slowly, because mainly the social norms were not necessarily challenged. So the traditions, I mean the negative ones, continued to also breaks, for this movement. But it was, the curve was going a little bit up slowly until, unfortunately, in 1983, a very big setback happened to the Sudanese women when the then dictator at the time, he suddenly imposed what he called the Sharia laws. And the imposition of that version of the Sharia laws, it was sort of like a Saudi type of Sharia, the Wahhabi type of Sharia. And it was not only the legal system, they started importing the Wahhabi social norms into Sudan, including, for example, the dress code, the wearing the burqa, the separation between sexes, which was never a case in the culture of Sudan, and so many norms that were not necessarily born in Sudan. And then the government, the dictatorship government, continued to institutionalize those imported radical Islamic social norms. They institutionalized them legally, for example, in the family law, which is the most discriminative law ever globally. The public order law, a law that restricts women movement and allow flogging women in the street and so on. The confusion between the rape and the zina, the adultery, the imposition of the dressing code, and the aggravation of the gender-based violence. That has movement, and only the pro-government groups were able to have a space to work.
Sorry, Dr. Acen, you want to wrap up?
The Sudanese Women Union was dissolved. The leaders were imprisoned, and by 1991, all the laws were Islamized, and that has a big impact on us, on the women of Sudan. The women were let out of their work, and they have been forced to flee the country and so on. We call it actually the dark Sudanese women. However, and I'm watching the time. However, we were able to come back. Because the women struggle never stopped. And I must say that the Beijing Conference of 1995 has a big impact on the Sudanese women, because it allowed Sudanese women to, some of us go there and to be exposed to the experiences of women globally. And then when the women came back, they started to form women groups, NGOs, and we started to change the old way of struggle into like small groups working sometimes undercover and working underground. And in doing so, of course, we faced huge challenges, and a dear price was being paid, including imprisonment of women, torture, interrogation, physical and verbal abuse. However, on the other side, the women started to gain respect from the side of the society because of the way they showed during their struggle. I get some examples, and I'm not sure whether I will be able to go through all of them. But for example, the Sudanese Women Union, against all social norms, they were able to take the governor of Khartoum to the constitutional court. That was a big thing in 2000. The group, which is called the North for Women Oppression, led a huge campaign against the public order. The family has been also challenged hugely. The Sudanese Network for the Abolition of Envy has launched a nationwide campaign. We worked to abolish or to amend certain articles in the panel code, and the Sudanese. You are not hearing me? Hello? 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 Hello, Jawad? You are not following me? Can I do what? Wrap up? Okay. I am asked to wrap up. Oh, anyway, you have the presentation. I will go for the fact that the Sudanese women movement have actually contributed to the revolution, to the December revolution, and we contributed to dismantle the oppressive regime. However, we are still struggling with the social norms because still the new government, although it is democratic now, they are still using the same excuses, and that's why the Sudanese women now are coming back into huge movement, and we are launching so many campaigns. I will finish with the 4 recommendations that are important. We need to organize around women agenda. We are still divided along tribal or ethnic lines. We have to work to create new narratives in the current times. Women's stories have to be told by them, and the voices of women have to be heard. And we have to alleviate the experiences of women, especially in the conflict areas. And we also have, as feminists, we have to dismantle the imaginary wall between the private and the public sphere. Because every social norms work strongly in the private sphere, and it is like a kitchen and a lab for all the negative social norms. And finally, women's solidarity beyond borders is necessary. That is why I'm so happy to, despite all the difficulties, to participate in this dialogue. Because, by the way, and I'm sending a message here, that these women are coming back to their origin in Africa. We have been isolated from Africa for quite a long time, and we have decided as possible.
Do we have any questions or contributions? We only have 5 minutes to do this.
We don't have any questions on the chat box, anyway.
Okay, do you see any hand that is up? If
No.
there is no hand, we'll just take the comments. Please take note of the comments that we have within the chat box.
Yes,
and then
I
we
did.
can move. Yes, we can. Yes, please. And thank you all thank you to all those who have made comments with them. Thank you. So maybe we can now go. Have we done so? Anyway, for the group 1, it is they'll be looking at the panacea of violence against women in elections. There are some guiding questions there for the group, 3 questions. What would be the 3 most important violence faced by women in public or private life? And secondly, in what ways can civil society and women's organizations at all levels be supported to better address violence against women? And the last one for the group 1, what role can the AU and regional economic communities play to ensure compliance of member states in the implementation of continental and regional commitments to address violence against women and girls? I hope the questions are clear. I also hope that the group will have the questions, a soft copy of the questions as we go into the breakout sessions. The second group is on changing negative social norms. And we've listened to Dr. Asha. We have 3 questions here. 1, to identify some of these norms and what needs to be done to change them. Secondly, what can be done by women's movement and the government's national machinery to address negative social norms, and what support will be needed to address this. The last group is on the women's movement, and I don't seem to see, for the women's movement, there are 3 questions as well. How can the women's movement be better positioned to lead the changes for protecting women's rights? Secondly, how can they be supported to do this? And then third, the top 3 recommendations for addressing this. So IT, can you help us so that our colleagues can go into their different rooms for the group work? Purity, how do we do this? Yes, can we do this like quickly? Yesterday we had some issues for people to go to their rooms. Could we be snappy now so that we start immediately? Thank you.
Yes, what I'm going to do is that I will open in that session.
Purity, I don't seem to be able to hear you. We just need for the participants to go into their different rooms for the group work.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I'm saying I will open the join the room that they are assigned.
Okay, can you do that right now? Thank you.